I still hear it sometimes, the crackling of dry leaves, the faint whispers of the wind that didn't quite sound like wind. But it wasn't the woods that got to me. It was him. I thought I had escaped, but I know better now. He's always been there. It all started with a weekend trip, a break from the chaos of daily life. Me, James, and a few of our friends decided to hit the Appalachian trails. No one wanted to be stuck in the city for a long weekend, especially with the promise of fresh air and the quiet peace of nature. We had no idea what was waiting for us. We set up camp near an old, almost forgotten path that I later found out wasn't even listed on any map. I should have been suspicious. Maybe it was my gut warning me, but I brushed it off. It wasn't until nightfall that things started to get strange. We'd built a fire, sat around it, laughing, telling stupid stories. James was the loudest, cracking jokes as always, making us all laugh harder than we should have. But the deeper the darkness got, the quieter the night seemed. The wind stopped, and the forest fell into an eerie stillness. That was the first thing I noticed. The quiet. We all thought it was normal at first, but when the wind didn't pick up for an hour, I started to feel uneasy. It's hard to explain why, but it felt like the forest had stopped breathing. The night felt suffocating, like we were being watched by something, someone. And then there was the sound. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person. It was like someone whispering. Not close, but not far either. Almost like it was carried by the wind, only it didn't sound quite right. Low, distorted, like someone was trying to speak through something thick, like a filter. James heard it too. He froze mid-sentence, the smile on his face fading into confusion. He looked over at me, eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, but didn't say anything. The others were too busy with their own thoughts to notice. We kept hearing it, those whispers, coming from the trees. I tried to rationalize it. A bird, an owl, something natural, but something inside me knew it wasn't. We decided to head to our tents, the unease turning into a tight knot in my stomach. I remember crawling into my sleeping bag and listening for any sign that I was just being paranoid. That's when I heard it again, closer this time. Closer than it should have been. The whispers weren't coming from the trees anymore. They were coming from the tent next to mine. I held my breath, and then I heard a soft rustling outside. A shuffle, then silence. I knew it wasn't one of us, and my heart began to race. I wasn't sure if I should wake the others. If I did, would they believe me? Or worse, would it make whatever was out there come closer? I stayed perfectly still, staring into the pitch-black darkness, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the worst part? The whispering had stopped, and in its place was the slow, rhythmic tapping against the side of my tent. It wasn't rain. It was something, someone. The tapping, it wasn't random. It was calculated, like a deliberate, steady rhythm. At first, it was light, barely audible, just a faint tapping against the fabric of the tent. But then it grew louder, more urgent. I could feel the vibrations beneath me as if something heavy was pushing against the tent. Couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My body felt frozen, every instinct telling me to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. The tapping didn't stop, and then, just as I was starting to lose my mind, I heard something else. A low growl, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. It was coming from inside the tent. I snapped my head around, trying to make out the shape of anything. My breath was ragged in the silence, so loud in my ears, and my thoughts were spinning. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I had no idea if whatever was outside would hear me and come closer. I thought I saw a shape, something moving just outside the thin fabric of the tent. A shadow, tall and unlike anything a human should be. It lingered there, unmoving, as if it were waiting for something. Maybe for me to make the first move. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, and every part of me screamed to run. But the sound of something scraping against the ground froze me in place. It was coming closer. Suddenly, a voice, deep and guttural, broke the silence. Not a whisper this time. A single word. Leave. I don't know what made me do it, but I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on. My hands were shaking so badly that the beam flickered at first, but when it steadied, I pointed it toward the shadow. Nothing. The ground was empty. The space outside the tent was as still as it had been when I first heard the sounds. My heart pounded in my chest, and I fought to keep calm. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe my mind had been playing tricks on me after too many hours in the woods. But just as I was about to relax, I saw it. A figure. Only it wasn't outside my tent. It was inside. It was standing right at the foot of my sleeping bag, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the flashlight. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long arms that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its face was nothing but a blank, smooth surface. No features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just white. The only thing that was real about it was its presence, its weight. Couldn't move, couldn't scream. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing, but it didn't make any sense. It was as though my mind refused to accept that something so wrong could exist. But there it was, standing over me, its tall frame looming in the dim light. And then, it whispered again, but this time, the voice came from inside my head. "You shouldn't be here." The temperature in the tent dropped sharply, and I could see my breath fogging up the air in front of me. I didn't even know how to react. I wanted to fight. I wanted to run, but my body was paralyzed with terror. I don't know how long it stood there, staring at me, or maybe it wasn't staring at all. It was hard to tell with its smooth, featureless face. But then, without warning, it backed away, moving with an unnatural speed and grace that shouldn't have been possible. The moment it disappeared into the shadows of the tent, I bolted up, grabbing my things, and without thinking, I scrambled to open the zipper. But the zipper wouldn't move. I yanked at it, frantic, pulling as hard as I could. My pulse was thundering in my ears. The tent was closed, locked in place, trapping me inside with whatever that thing was. I could hear it now, moving around the camp, moving closer. I didn't know what to do, and in the panic, I did the only thing that made sense. I screamed. The scream echoed through the trees. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. For a moment, everything went dead silent. The whispers, the growls, even the wind, it all stopped, as though the forest itself had frozen in time. I tugged at the zipper again, my hands slick with sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. Couldn't breathe. I felt trapped in that suffocating space, with that thing still nearby, somewhere outside, waiting. Finally, the zipper gave way with a low, reluctant zip, and I shot through the opening, scrambling out of the tent. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face. I wasn't sure if I was running from the creature, or if I was just running from my own panic. But I didn't care. I ran. The dark forest seemed to close in around me, the trees like towering sentinels. I could barely see through the dense underbrush, but I didn't care. I had to get away. I had to escape. Behind me, I heard it, the scraping again, like something dragging its feet over the ground, slow and deliberate. It was following me. It wasn't running. It was walking as if it had all the time in the world. I stumbled over rocks, tripped on roots, my flashlight bouncing wildly in my hands. I could barely hear my breath over the pounding of my own feet. My mind was racing. What if I ran straight into it? What if it was already waiting for me up ahead? I couldn't even remember which way I'd come from. Everything looked the same. Suddenly, I heard a voice, a human voice. "James?" It was Sarah. I had completely forgotten she was camping with us. I stopped in my tracks, relief flooding me for just a second. I tried to scream for her, but my voice caught in my throat. My whole body was shaking too much. "Sarah?" I called out hoarsely. "Sarah, get out of here. It's not safe." The voice came again, closer this time, but it wasn't Sarah. It sounded distorted, like it was being said through a layer of static or water. "Come closer, James." My blood ran cold. I froze. The voice was wrong. It was too off. It wasn't her. Before I could react, the flashlight flickered and went out. Darkness. Absolute, suffocating darkness. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed the flashlight, pounding it in my palm, trying to get it to work, but it wouldn't turn on. That's it. I'm dead. I'm not getting out of this. That thought passed through my mind as I felt my knees give way. I collapsed onto the cold ground, panic overwhelming me. And then, through the blackness, I heard it again, closer than ever. The voice. But this time, it was a whisper, right in my ear. "We've been waiting for you." I spun around, but no one was there. There was no one in sight. The forest was as empty as it had been before. But I could feel something watching me. And then, through the trees, I saw the faintest flicker of light, a distant glow, a fire. My eyes locked onto it. It was the campfire, the one we had left behind when everything went wrong. I didn't think. I didn't stop to question it. I just ran, desperate to get back to where I had felt safe, to where the others were. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could make it back, grab the others, and get the hell out of the woods. But the closer I got to the campfire, the less right it felt. The fire was burning bright, but the heat didn't reach me. It was like the flames were taunting me, flickering in a way that made my skin crawl. The shadows seemed deeper around it, the darkness pressing in on the light, as though the night itself were trying to swallow the fire whole. I slowed down, my breath catching in my throat. My instincts screamed for me to turn around, to run in the opposite direction. But I couldn't. And then, as I got closer, I saw it, the figure. It wasn't the thing from the tent. It was a person, or at least it looked like one. But something was horribly wrong. It was moving strangely, jerking and twitching as if it were a puppet, strings pulled by something unseen. Its face was obscured by the flickering firelight, but I could see its long, ragged clothes, its arms hanging at odd angles. I knew, deep down, that this wasn't someone from the group. This wasn't human. And then it turned toward me. I froze, my legs locked in place, my breath catching in my throat. The thing, no, the creature, slowly turned its head toward me, its body jerking unnaturally with each movement, like it was being controlled by some invisible force. But then it stopped. It stood there, facing me, with its face shrouded in shadows. I couldn't see its eyes at first. I thought maybe it was just the flickering light of the campfire playing tricks on me. But then, slowly, it raised its head. And when it did, I saw them. Eyes, two hollow black pits. No whites, no pupils, just endless darkness. The sheer void of them made me feel like I was being swallowed whole, like they were pulling me in, dragging me closer to something worse. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed. The air around me grew heavier, suffocating. The smell of smoke, pine, and damp earth turned rancid, as if the forest itself had turned on me. My head spun as I stared at the creature, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. Then the thing spoke, but it wasn't the voice of a person. It wasn't even the same distorted voice from before. It was cold, empty, like something was reaching out from beyond the grave, scratching at the edges of my mind. "You shouldn't have come here." I couldn't respond. I couldn't even think. My mind screamed at me to run, but all I could do was stand there, locked in place by some invisible force. I could hear my pulse in my ears, louder than the whispers, louder than the crackling of the fire. The creature's limbs twitched again, a grotesque mockery of life. It slowly began to move toward me, its feet dragging over the ground with a scraping sound that sent chills down my spine. Each step it took felt like it was getting closer to breaking the very fabric of reality, like the boundaries between life and death were collapsing with each movement. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but I could still feel it moving closer. I wanted to look away, to turn and run, but I couldn't. The moment I opened my eyes again, I saw the creature's face right in front of mine. The firelight danced off its skin, pale, almost translucent, and I could see the twisted grin spreading across its face. It wasn't a grin of joy. It was a grin of something much darker. Then, in a voice that sounded like it was coming from deep beneath the earth, it said, "It's already too late." Without warning, it reached out. Its long, gnarled fingers scraped against my face, cold and clammy. and I felt my body lurch backward as if something was pulling me toward it. I tried to break free, but it was like an invisible hand was clutching my chest, squeezing tighter and tighter. My vision blurred, and my throat constricted as if the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I fought with every ounce of strength I had left. I screamed, but no sound came out. Everything around me went black. I don't know how long I was out. It felt like I had been swallowed by darkness, drifting in some cold, empty void, unable to move, unable to think. But when I woke up, I was no longer at the camp. I was lying on the cold, hard ground. My body ached, like I'd been dragged across rocks. The air smelled wrong. Not just the wet earth of the forest, but something more putrid, as if decay had set in and never left. I shot up, gasping for air, my heart hammering in my chest. I looked around, but I couldn't recognize anything. The trees were twisted, their trunks bent in unnatural ways, the leaves hanging like broken shards of glass. It was like I had been transported somewhere else entirely, a place that was still part of the woods but not quite. A low, groaning sound reached my ears, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps. I whipped my head around, searching the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. The sound was coming from everywhere, echoing off the trees, reverberating through the twisted landscape. That's when I saw it. A figure moving in the distance, its outline barely visible in the gloom. It was too tall, too hunched, the way it moved making my skin crawl. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to breathe. But the instinct to survive kicked in. I had to get out. Couldn't be here. Not with that thing. I got to my feet, swaying slightly, trying to get my bearings. My head was spinning, the world around me distorting as if I were stuck in a nightmare. Every step I took felt like a wrong step, like the ground beneath me was shifting. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, almost like a hum, vibrating through my bones. It was coming from behind me. Slowly, deliberately, the footsteps grew louder. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. If I did, I knew I would never move again. I ran. My legs burned, but I kept going. Branches whipped against my face. The ground was uneven, rocks and roots grabbing at my feet, but I couldn't stop. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get away from that thing, whatever it was. The trees seemed to close in on me, the forest alive with shadows that reached out to grab me. I pushed through, desperate, frantic, not knowing if I was running towards safety or deeper into hell. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I caught a glimpse of something just behind me. A blur of movement, a flicker of dark limbs that shouldn't have been possible. And then, I saw something in the distance. A faint light. A campfire. I almost didn't believe it. I wasn't sure if I was seeing things, or if I had somehow stumbled back to the camp. I was too far gone to think clearly, but I pushed forward, my legs carrying me toward it despite the overwhelming fear that gnawed at my insides. As I got closer, the light grew brighter, but something was wrong. The fire wasn't warm. There was no comforting glow. It flickered unnaturally, casting long, twisted shadows that didn't match the shape of the trees. The camp was wrong. And then I heard a voice. James. I spun around, my breath catching. The voice, soft, familiar, like it was coming from someone I knew, called my name, but it sounded wrong, distorted, twisted. Not Sarah, not anyone from my group. I looked toward the fire, and standing near it was someone, but it wasn't Sarah or anyone I recognized. The figure was tall, almost too tall, with dark hair that hung down in tangled strands. It was wearing one of our jackets. My heart dropped. The face was covered in shadows, but I could see the outline of eyes, gleaming in the firelight. The figure stepped forward, slowly. Its movements were deliberate. It wasn't human. I could feel it. It was as if it were a puppet like the one I had seen before. "You're not supposed to be here." It whispered it again, and then it reached out toward me. Before I could even react, the darkness swallowed me again. When I woke up again, I was back at the camp. But it wasn't the camp I had left behind. The fire was gone. The tents were in disarray, their fabric torn as if something had been clawing at them. The trees surrounding the site were twisted and gnarled, their bark warped, as though the forest itself had aged centuries in a single night. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. It felt like the whole world was collapsing around me, sinking into a darkness that I could neither escape nor comprehend. The ground beneath me trembled, and I could hear distant cries, low and haunting, echoing through the air. I turned to face them, but there was nothing there. And then I saw it. The figure was standing there again, at the edge of the camp, its face still obscured by shadows, but its presence was unmistakable. It was the same one, the puppet-like creature I had seen before. Its limbs twisted at impossible angles, its head slightly cocked, like it was studying me, watching. It stepped forward, the unnatural scraping of its feet against the earth filling the air, and once again, the voice came. This time it was clear, sharp, and cold, like the very air had frozen. "You belong to us now." I tried to move, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. The ground beneath me seemed to pull at my feet, holding me in place, and I felt a chill, deep down in my bones, like something was burrowing into my soul. The figure took another step closer. Its hands, twisted and gnarled, reached for me, but I could feel it before it even touched me. The air around me grew thicker, darker, as if the world itself was being eaten alive. "There's nowhere to run, James." I closed my eyes, my heart pounding, my mind screaming for a way out. I thought of the others, Sarah, Michael, and the rest of the group. Had they made it out? Were they out there somewhere, lost in this nightmare too? And then it hit me. The whispers, the voices, everything that had happened. This wasn't just a creature. This wasn't just some twisted figment of my imagination. This was something older, something ancient, something tied to this place. I remembered the warnings I'd heard, the locals who told us not to go there. I thought they were just trying to scare us. I didn't realize the truth. The forest, the land, it was cursed. It had been cursed for generations, and we had been foolish enough to trespass. The creature took one more step, and then it stopped, just inches from me. It reached out with a single, elongated finger, touching my chest lightly. And in that moment I knew there was a choice. I could either stay, become another part of this place, another shadow trapped in this endless loop, or I could try to break free. With every ounce of strength I had left, I made my choice. I fought. I threw myself forward, breaking free from the paralysis. I don't know how, but I ran with every last bit of will I had, toward the edge of the woods. The creature's voice screamed behind me, the ground shaking beneath my feet, but I didn't look back. Couldn't. I didn't know how much time passed, or even how far I ran. All I knew was that I had to get away, and somehow, by some miracle, I made it. I don't know how. I don't know if I escaped the curse of the woods, or if I'm still running. But I'm alive, and I know one thing for certain. The forest is still out there, and if you're foolish enough to venture into it, it will find you. It's always watching, always waiting, and maybe, just maybe, it's still waiting for me.